It was a very fitting hymn, I feel, for the message that we would like to bring to you today. I'd like to turn to the book of Psalms, chapter 69. This is what we would call a messianic psalm in the Old Testament. Though it is written by the hand of David, and no doubt it describes something that is occurring in his life at this time, there are several spots in here that are specific statements attributed to Christ in the New Testament. So, for example, in Psalm 69 and verse 9, it says, "For the zeal of thine house hath eaten me up, and the reproaches of them that reproached thee are fallen upon me." The zeal of thine house hath eaten me up is a quote that is remembered in John chapter 2 when Jesus cleanses the temple of those who were money changers and sold doves for sacrifice, and they were overcharging the people, and Christ came in and chased them out of the temple the first time. It says the disciples remembered, "The zeal of thine house hath eaten me up." So this, we know, applies to him then. The last half of that verse, "The reproaches of them that reproached thee are fallen upon me." The Apostle Paul quotes this in Romans chapter 15 and verse 3. Now, I particularly like this verse. "The reproaches of them," that's you, "that reproached thee," that's God, "have fallen upon me," that's Christ. Your sins that offended God were placed on Christ, is what that text means. So you have two of them right there together. You read on a little bit further, and it reminds us that in my bitterness they gave me vinegar and gall to drink. That is verse 21. "They gave me also gall for my meat, and in my thirst they gave me vinegar to drink." Surely you've heard enough Bible preaching to realize that that's what occurred to Christ upon the cross. So we have about 3 direct verses here applied to the Savior. And then there are a couple of other ones that are somewhat indirectly applied. They refer to passages in Isaiah and in the book of Zechariah, that when you read those, we know that they are specifically applied to Christ. So this is a psalm, though written by the pen of David about something in his life, that no doubt this is applied to Christ the Savior. I would not dare say that I am as good as Jesus. I would not dare say that you are as good as Jesus. Right? However, Jesus said, if they did it to the master, don't you think they'll do it to the servant? If they hated him, if they despised him, if they looked down upon him, what do you think they will do to his followers? So, what's particularly caught my attention, is verse 4. David writes, "They that hate me without a cause are more than the hairs of mine head. They that would destroy me, being my enemies wrongfully, are mighty. Then I restored that which I took not away." Again, that last phrase right there is an absolutely beautiful phrase, wherein Christ says, "I restored that which I took not away." So something was taken away. I didn't take it away, but I restored it. There was fellowship between God and Adam took that fellowship away. But here comes Christ, having restored between you and God what someone else took away. I give you that one for free. That has nothing to do with the sermon other than the first half of that. They which hate me are more than the hairs of my head. They that would destroy me, being mine enemies wrongfully, are mighty. 3 times in the Bible this phrase is repeated. They that hate me without a cause. It's found here in Psalm 69. It's found also in Psalm 35. Psalm 35 and the 19th verse. Let not them that are mine enemies wrongfully rejoice over me. Neither let them wink with the eye that hate me without a cause. I feel it important to also point out that the text written from David's hand says that they that are mine enemies wrongfully. I've given a lot of people enough reason to hate me. How about you? I mean, if we examined our life, if we were honest with ourselves, if we sat down with God, we've given enough people, plenty of people, enough reasons to not like us. That's just who we are. So I like the phrase in here, wrongfully. Because there are some people in this life that I don't like, right? And there are some people in this life who do, in fact, suffer, and they suffer correctly. But when you're talking about Jesus Christ, nobody ever had a reason to hate Christ. The suffering that He endured, He, in fact, is the only person in human history that has ever, at all times, suffered wrongfully. So you have these 2 verses, Psalm 69, Psalm 35, verse 19. Both of these are referenced. The Gospel of John, chapter 15. In John chapter 15, we have these words. John 15, verse 25 says, "But this cometh to pass, that the word might be fulfilled that is written in their law, they hated me without a cause." There's a passage here that really kind of encompasses all of this, beginning, well, it's kind of hard to know where to begin when you're dealing with something like this, but Jesus begins in, say, verse 12, that this is my commandment, that ye love one another as I have loved you. We covered this a few weeks ago. Verse 18 says, "If the world hate you, ye know that it hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love his own." Now that is painfully evident in the world in which we live right now. Painfully evident in the world of politics, in the world of sports, in the business you work for. This is painfully evident. That sometimes people are criticized for what they do depending on which side they stand on. I think we have to be careful in our life as to who and what we identify with. You may be white, you may be black. You may be male, you may be female. You may be Republican or Democrat. You may be Christian or non-Christian, whatever it is. Specifically, let's speak to the Christians. Because ultimately, whatever you are as a person, should be second to who you are in the eyes of God. You should be a Christian first, and everything else second. Christianity, God's book, should be what molds and defines your life. Not the winds of politics. Not the ideals of the nation around us. Because I'm glad to be an American, where at least I know I'm free, right? Or at least I think I'm free. But there may come a time where America as we know it doesn't exist anymore. What are you going to do then if your identity is wrapped up in being an American? They can do away with America. They are certainly trying to. But friends, they can't do away with God. They can't do away with Jesus Christ. They cannot do away with a single thing that He has done for you that will benefit you not only in this life, but in the world to come. He says in verse 19, "But because you are not of the world, I have chosen you out of the world. Therefore the world hateth you." I like what the Lord has to say in beginning in verse 22. He says, "If I had not come and spoken unto them, they had not had sin." Now, if you stop right there, you might get the idea that had Jesus not addressed their issues, that they would not be considered sinners. Well, you've got to read the next phrase in that text, though. He says here in John 15, verse 22, "But now they have no cloak for their sin." If you have a center column reference Bible, there should be a little marker, either by this verse or maybe by that word cloak in this text. If you look in the center column, there'll be a second definition for this word cloak. It can also be read as excuse. So when you put that in the text, they're already sinners. They're sinners by birth. They're sinners by practice. They're sinners by representation. Everything about them, they are sinners. But if you're just sitting across the table from someone having a discussion, you really don't know about this person. Only when you walk with them in their daily life do you really get to know this person. That's why the challenge of marriage is far greater than the challenge of dating somebody. You can like and love anyone you don't have to live with. Living with that person is completely different. Oh, and by the way, living with that person in the bounds of marriage as opposed to living with that person just shacking up is also completely different. What Jesus has to say here is that had I not come and spoken to them, had I not come and done things around them, they would not have an excuse for their sin. So if someone says, "I don't have time to do something," or "I don't have the understanding to do something," or "I don't have the tools to do something." Well, if you come along and you give them time, and you give them tools, and you give them education, and they still don't do it, then it's not time that's the issue, right? It's not the lack of tools that's the issue, right? It's they themselves that are the issue. Jesus says in verse 24, "If I had not done among them the works which none other man did, they had not had sin." When Christ came, it was fairly evident who and what He was. There was no question that this man was different. In John chapter 3, Nicodemus, a ruler of the Jews, came to him by night and said unto him in John chapter 3 and verse 2, middle of that verse, we know that thou art a teacher come from God. For no man can do these miracles that thou doest except God be with him. I believe it was the baseball player Yogi Berra who said, it's not bragging if it's true. It's not bragging if it's true. It's not boasting if it's true. If he says he can throw a football 300 yards, if he can do it, it's not necessarily boasting and bragging. It's just true. If you can hit a baseball 500 miles, it's not bragging and boasting if you can do it. It's true. When it came to Christ, saying one thing, doing another, was proved in the life of Christ that he didn't just say things, he did it. You remember the instance when he healed the man sick of the palsy. The first thing he did was he said, thy sins be forgiven thee. And the Pharisees were offended by that. Nobody can forgive sins except God. And that is true. And there's a reason Jesus did that. He said, to show you that I have power to forgive sins, which is easier, to say, thy sins be forgiven thee? It's easier to say something. Or to say to the man sick of the palsy, arise, take up thy bed and walk. Well, it's a lot easier just to say something. A whole lot harder to do something. And in their presence, he both said and did something human beings cannot do. He healed a man immediately and forgave him of his sins. He did things in their presence nobody else had ever done. There was a time when Jesus went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day in Luke chapter 4. It says he went there as his custom was and stood up for to read. This is Luke chapter 4, and that particular passage begins around verse 16. And he read to them from the book of Isaiah chapter 61 and told them that this day is this scripture fulfilled in your ears. For the most part, they rejected what was happening. Because what if I were to tell you that Bible prophecy was being revealed right now in your day? It'd be an interesting thought, wouldn't it? Could you actually believe it? I don't know if I could. But this man who was just the son of a carpenter stands up and tells them the promise of the coming Messiah is revealed in front of you right now. This prophecy is fulfilled. The Messiah is here. And it's me, the lowly son of a carpenter. And they rejected that knowledge because they knew his family, and they knew his brothers and his sisters, and said it just cannot be so. But it does say in verse 22 that consider some of the poor people that were there, some of the common people that were there. It does say this, that they all bear witness and wondered at the gracious words which proceeded out of his mouth. And immediately they said, is not this Joseph's son? We recognize there's something different about him, but that can't be true because he's just Joseph's son. Well, he wasn't really Joseph's son. Pharisees thought he was. Sadducees thought he was. You and I know different. But they did have to make this statement. We marvel at the gracious words that came out of his mouth. They did have to admit when they sent soldiers to arrest him one night and the soldiers came back empty-handed, they said, "Why have you not brought him to us?" And they said, "Never a man spake like this man." There's something different about the way he talks. They marveled in various different places at his doctrine, for he spake unto them as one having authority. The statement of Jesus having authority is quite different from the statement of you observing somebody in your life growing up and becoming educated and achieving a position of authority. He did not achieve authority. He was not given authority. He was a man who had authority. And they recognized it. Something different about this guy. You can also notice in the Gospel of Matthew chapter 9, verse 32. Matthew 9:32 says, "As they went out, behold, they brought to him a dumb man possessed with a devil." The term dumb in the Bible does not have reference to intellect. It has reference to vocal ability. The man cannot speak. Matthew 9:33 says, "And when the devil was cast out, the dumb spake. And the multitudes marveled, saying, It was never so seen in Israel." So he said things that were never said. And he did things that were never done. That he lived such a life that was far above reproach and far more above anyone else that he was around, as the Bible would tell us that he was holy, harmless, undefiled, and separate from sinners. Therefore, it is a reasonable statement to say they hated him without a cause. So if Jesus says they've done this to the Master, and if the world hated me, what do you think they're going to do to you? I know, as we've already stated, I must state this again, that I've given plenty of reasons for people to not like me in this life. But friends, in this wicked world we live in, you don't have to give somebody a reason not to like you. We recognize in the society in which we live that there are a lot of people who wake up every day ready to be offended. They just wake up and walk out their front door looking for something to complain about. It's human nature. It is human nature. It is within us. It is within the core being of human beings to complain rather than to be grateful. You say, preacher, you've got Bible for that? Absolutely. How do you think we all got to this position? Genesis chapter 3. When God told Adam, He says, of every tree of the garden thou mayest freely eat, except one. For in the day that thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die. And the devil comes along and says, good, that's the very thing that we want to focus on. Is not the vast amount that we have, but the very little that we don't have. Now, this is a thought for another time, but I'll go ahead and give it to you today because I think it's a good thought. That in our life, I don't think it's so much that God has given us too little, but that we as human beings desire and want too much. So we know in our society that there are people who wake up ready to be offended and to live quiet and peaceable lives in all godliness and honesty, and as much as within you is, live peaceably with all men, is foreign in the world in which we live. War's on the horizon again, right? Maybe. Or maybe war is already here, it just hadn't gotten to us yet. I'm quite amazed at some of the things that I do see in the news and some of the things that do come out of college campuses nowadays. Is just how ignorant many people are that walk the streets of our college campuses and fill the streets of American cities. That most of them have no idea what they are talking about. The Apostle Peter addresses the issue of suffering. 1 Peter chapter 2. Jesus said in John 15, quoted from Psalm 69, that they that hate me without a cause are more than the hairs of my head. And it does seem like oftentimes the people that hate you cause the most noise in your life. But this kind of also is a natural principle. Crank up your car, and the car is running fine. Nothing really wrong with the car, so we expect the car to run quietly, correct? You get in the car, crank it up, you go on down the road. When it starts to tear up is when it starts to make the most noise. When your brakes go out, or they start to go out, the brake pads have something on them called a squealer. It's a little strip of metal that when the brake pad gets worn down, the metal rubs against the rotor, and it goes sss every time you stop. It's letting you know you're fixing to have a major problem if you don't get this fixed. Most of us did not grow up in the country. I did not grow up in the country. Most of us have never driven in horse and buggy. Some of y'all may have. I did not. But it's been told to me by those in olden days that an empty cart makes the most noise. Right? You load the cart down with a big old heavy weight and it'll just chug on down the road. The horse will pull it just fine. Of course, in the delivery van that I drive, if I put, tons of weight in the back of the truck, it drives a whole lot smoother. When the truck is empty in the back, the front of the truck shakes me to death. And the reality is when you look at people in this world, the empty people make the most noise. The people who have nothing going on in their head and nothing going on in their soul and nothing going on between them and God make the most noise. And it just seems like a lot of times that those who hate you may be more prevalent than those that love you. Now that's a shame on us, right? I mean, when was the last time you called your doctor to see how he was doing? You don't ever call you kind of looking at me strange like, have you ever called your doctor and said, "Doctor, how are you doing today?" Y'all ain't never done that, have you? No, you call your doctor and say, "Doctor, I got something wrong with me. Need you to fix it." Right? Right? There's no use crying at a funeral if you didn't cry while they were alive, is what that means. Peter says in 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 19, "For this is thankworthy." You don't have anything to be thankful for in life? Peter says this is thankworthy. "If a man for conscience toward God endure grief, suffering wrongfully." I done read that word wrongfully to you about 3 times already. Psalm 69 verse 4, Psalm 35 verse 19, and here. The word wrongfully appears in Scripture 7 different times, 3 of them in what we're dealing with today. This is thankfulness if a man toward God suffer wrongfully. Because see, the point we're getting at is at some point in life we are all going to suffer. Whether you deserve it or not. As my mama used to tell folk back in the day, I give him a whipping once a week, whether he deserves it or not. Or if you've ever had more than one child, and you have to whip one of them, and they're like, "Oh, I didn't do anything." Well, you probably got away with something last week, so we'll just back try this. Right? Listen to what he says here. "What glory is it, if when ye be buffeted for your faults, ye shall take it patiently?" Well, what glory is that? If you're being chastised and punished for what you've done wrong, you ought to stand there and say nothing. But if when you do well and suffer for it, you take it patiently, this is acceptable with God. So let's just suppose that at some point in your life you're going to suffer wrongfully. Can we just we'll nod that. We'll say that at some point in life you're going to be in trouble for something you didn't do, or you're going to be in trouble for something someone thinks you meant. We'll just go with that, right? Verse 21, "For even hereunto were ye called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that ye should follow his steps." Staying here in 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 15. Well, verse 14. 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 14. "If ye be reproached for the name of Christ, happy are ye." Really? Are you really happy for being reproached for the name of Christ? I don't know. I don't know if I'd have the same attitude that the apostles had when they took him before the Sanhedrin and whipped him. They went out with joy, counting themselves to have suffered for the name of Christ. I don't know. I guess we'll have to wait and see if we ever end up in that position. I mean, if ever we're standing here on Sunday morning and the back doors of the church open, and in come the authorities saying the proclamation of the gospel is no longer allowed in America, and haul me off to jail, what will we do? What will we think? Because I dare say that when churches, for lack of a better term, interview preachers to be pastors, I dare say that any of our pastors have ever had the resume, I was 5 times was I beaten with stripes, I was shipwrecked, I spent a night and a day in the deep, I've been in every jail in every city that I've ever been in. I doubt very seriously that that would be the pastor that we want. But it might very well be the pastor we need. Yeah. I don't know. It's easy to say that, though, now, while we're sitting here in the Conference of Freedom. We'll readdress that when we're hiding in dens and caves one day. He says in verse 14, "Happy are ye, for the Spirit of glory and of our God resteth upon you. On their part he is evil spoken of, but on your part he is glorified." See, on their part, the world around us speaks evil of God, does it not? Yes. The world around us has no care for God, nothing about Him. Even though the greatest message that Jesus ever gave was, love thy neighbor. And if you didn't like that message, He said, let's back up a little bit, and He said, love your enemies. That love ought to flow from you, whether you like the person or not. Verse 15, he says, but I find this verse most intriguing. Y'all with me on this one? Verse 15, you got this one? Read what this verse says. But let none of you suffer as a murderer. Murderers ought to suffer, right? You kill somebody, they ought to suffer. Or as a thief. You steal something, they ought to suffer. Or as an evildoer. If you're not a murderer or a thief, just something else. Just put it all in one basket. Read that very next phrase. Or as a busybody. What? Wait a minute, huh? Or as a busybody in other men's matters. Wow. I mean, how many of y'all did we just hang on that phrase right there? See, I have to be careful with what I say with this going out into the world. Because I don't need to be charged with inciting violence. But let me just make this point as best I sure can, is that there is a difference between intervening and interfering. I don't mind doctors intervening when you have a problem. I mind them interfering in a process. I don't mind people intervening when they see a problem in my life. Of course, I have to be willing to admit I have a problem. Now, that's a big thing right there. You see ads all the time about if you know somebody that has mental health issues, get them help. Hey, they got to be willing to have help. They got to be willing to admit they have a problem. And the older they get, the harder it is to get them help because they get independent and they get grown up as an adult. And they don't need their mama or their daddy telling them what to do. We're all like that. And we have to be careful being a busybody in other men's matters. Yet, let's go on to happier things here. Yet if any man suffer as a Christian, Let him not be ashamed. You see, the Lord told us to love our enemies and to bless them that curse us and do good to them that hate you. This is Matthew chapter 5, verses 43 through 45. And there may come a point in your life that indeed you may have to suffer wrongfully. Now, the older I've gotten, the less I like drama. The older I've gotten, the less I like drama. TV shows where all they do is yell and holler at one another make no sense to me. Don't understand it. Don't like it. Don't watch them. Even if it's a show that I'm particularly interested in, skip it, go on to the next episode, or just quit watching it altogether. You see, someone says, well, if I'm doing what's right, shouldn't God just bless me? That's not a guarantee. As a matter of fact, if you're doing what's right, God may indeed bless you to endure what the world doesn't like. See, there's a difference between being delivered from the storm and being delivered through the storm. And we oftentimes get mixed up about that. We just want to be delivered from the problem. And I got you on that. If you keep reading Psalm 69, verse 14, he says, deliver me from them that hate me. Hey, no doubt about that. Hey, I'm with you on that, David. Jesus says, if it be thy will, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. In other words, let's sort of sum up this whole concept here of dealing with them that hate you. Only you can live up to the low expectations of them that hate you. Did you catch that? You're the only person that can live up to the low expectations of them that hate you. You see, most people that hate you, in the same way that they hated Christ, they were always looking for a way to trap him and make him fail. They were always looking for a way to cause him to stumble. They were always looking for a way to trap him in what he said and what he did. Those that hate Christians and hate the church, I guarantee you they are waiting for us to fail. So that they can stand back and say, see, I told you so. See, some folks may rejoice when some of these charlatan preachers on TV or on the radio get caught in their problems. I don't know what y'all thought about, Jimmy Swaggart back in the day. I don't know what y'all think about, Kenneth Copeland and his ridiculousness, or Joel Osteen and what they do. I don't know what y'all thought about Creflo Dollar a few years ago from Atlanta, who petitioned his church and people worldwide to help him buy a new private jet. Shaking your head, right? Here's a problem. When they fail, we fail. Now, his failure doesn't cause me to be a failure, but in the public eye, when he fails, we all fail. Because to the world, there's no difference. See? It's sort of like the man who's president. Whether you voted for him or not, he's still your president. And if you go around wanting this man to fail, he's still your president. He's president of this nation. And if he fails, the nation fails. Oh, we can't have him succeed. That means our guy will never get in there. Well, a lot of times your guy ain't no different. Or whichever side you're on. I don't care what side you're on. It doesn't matter to me. I'm not here on sides. I'm just trying to give you principles that our enemies are oftentimes waiting for us to fail. And you're the only one that can believe the negative things said by those who hate you. Now, there were a lot of negative things said about Christ, were they not? What, none of them true, right? There may be a lot of negative things said about you. If they're not true, you're the only one that knows if they're true to start with. Secondly, you're the only one that has the ability to allow those things to affect and effect you. They expect nothing more of us than failure. The world around you may consider you a deadbeat dad. I'm the only one that can affect whether or not I get up and go to work on Monday, right? I'm the only one that can affect, whether or not I perform a good task while I'm at work. Doesn't matter what the world thinks about me. I'm really the only one that has the ability to concrete what they think or defeat what they think. The world may look down on Christ. The world may look down on Christianity. You're the only one that has the ability to affect what the world thinks about your religion in their eyes. Jesus said, "They that hate me without a cause are more than the hairs of my head." So you know what? Everybody just hates me. Nobody likes me. I'm just going to quit and give up. Is that what he said? That's not what he did. So then the final point might of this be that your enemies are going to hate you regardless of what you do. If you fail, they're going to rejoice. If you succeed, it's just going to make them matter. Because they came to him in John 10 and said, "If thou be the Christ, tell us plainly." He says, "I told you and you believe not. The works that I do in my Father's name, they bear witness of me." John 10, 24, 25? He says, "But ye believe not, because you're not of my sheep." Your enemies are going to hate you regardless of what you do sometimes. So, you might as well just do what's right. Because I'd sure hate to be the person who does what's wrong to soothe my enemies and in the process make God mad at me. Life's tough to start with. It's hard because we live in this sin-cursed world. We ought to know this. But we have to remind ourselves that we have a friend in Jesus. If the world hated you, it's probably because they hated him to start with. And if they hate him the same way they hated you, then he understands. You may go through some things in life, and there'll be nobody that really understands where you're at. My mother's still living, so I don't understand what it's like not to have a mother. I never had siblings, so I don't understand what it's like to lose a sibling. I have children. Don't know what it's like to lose a child. So a lot of your problems I cannot understand. I can sympathize with the pain that you are feeling, but I cannot comprehend and understand. But there is one that sticketh closer than a brother. That when you are at your lowest, you are at your darkest, and you are at your deepest, He definitely does understand. So this is why a lot of the Psalms that are written by men are applicable to Jesus, to remind us that there is one who does care and does understand. So Peter would close out his epistle, cast your cares upon Him, for God careth for you. The world may hate me. The world may hate you. But rather than thinking about what the world hates, think about what God loves. And that was that God loved you and sent His only begotten Son to die for you. Thank you for your good attention this morning.